Made my chains are numb. 'Cause your grace holds them around.
And it's a blessing to see everybody who came to celebrate with Ashanti. I think pretty much most of the section over here has come to celebrate with us, Ashanti, and everybody else who's new here this morning. We welcome you. Let me get to my message here. Well, we're in week 3 of a series that's 4 weeks long where we're focusing on God's vision for our church. And you all like the balloons better than what I am saying right now. So, either that or Brooklyn, I don't know which one. It's the mom jeans, I think. Oh, let's outlaw those. We're in week 3 of a four-week series talking about God's vision for our church. And every weekend you will hear me talking about choosing for. I'll talk about using that phrase, choosing for, because we want to be a group of Jesus followers who are known for choosing to be for people rather than against them. And last weekend, I spoke to you about how in order to do this, we have to bless instead of curse. That God calls us to bless people rather than curse people. Today, I want to take a look at what it means to choose for from a different angle. And it's another simple phrase. And the phrase is, if you want to choose to be for, then we have to welcome instead of cold shoulder. So what I want you to do is I want you to look to somebody next to you and just give them the cold shoulder. Just give it to them. Just like, I ain't want to be around you right now. Yeah. Doesn't feel good. Let's go to the Bible to start off this morning. We're going to go to the book of Romans. The book of Romans is in the New Testament, and the New Testament is the second half of the Bible. That's right after what we call the 4 Gospels. That's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then we have the book of Acts, which is also written by the person who wrote the book of Luke. Right after the book of Acts is the book of Romans. And this is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to Christians living in Rome. And so I'm going to read to you chapter 14, verses 1 and 2, and then I will read to you chapter 15, verses 1 through 7. Chapter 14, verses 1 says, welcome those who are weak in faith, but not for the purpose of quarreling over opinions. Some believe in eating anything, while the weak eat only vegetables. Sorry for all the vegetarians in the room. And jump over to chapter 15, verse 1. It says, we who are strong ought to put up with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Each of us must please our neighbor for the good purpose of building up the neighbor. For Christ did not please himself, but as it is written, the insults of those who insult you have fallen on me. For whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction, so that by steadfastness and by the encouragement of the scriptures we might have hope. May the God of steadfastness and encouragement grant you to live in harmony with one another, in accordance with Christ Jesus, so that together you may with one voice glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Welcome one another. Therefore, just as Christ has welcomed you, for the glory of God. I'm convinced that if we as a church focused on welcoming instead of cold shouldering, then God's love would be made visible to the world. And I think that's why we're believers. I mean, I know we're all excited about the possibility of heaven someday, where we think about streets of gold or whatever it is that you think about when you think about heaven, and those things are good. But I think deep down, all of us are followers of Jesus because we believe God's love has made a significant impact in our life. And we want other people to know that that same love can make an impact in their life. And so we as followers of Jesus, what we're about is trying to make that love visible to the rest of the world. We don't want to hide it. In the scriptures, it says, why would you take a light and hide it under a bushel? It makes no sense. You take the light and you put it on the top of a hill so that everybody knows where the light is and they can be somehow affected by the light. That's why I'm convinced that if we were a church that focused on welcoming rather than cold shouldering, then God's love would be made visible to the world. The problem is, it's a struggle for us. We struggle with writing people off. We struggle with it. Our disagreements become our dividing lines. Our differences in opinions and thoughts and practices are the kind of things that create boundaries between us and other people. Some of the things in our life where we aren't even sure if we have room for engagement, they turn into opportunities for people to argue and to lecture one another. And one whole section of the Bible that's written by Paul to the Romans focuses on this very issue between two groups of Christians, between the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians. And Paul is concerned that the Gentile followers of Jesus will completely write off the Jewish followers of Jesus. Which is why in chapter 14, verse 1, Paul writes to them and says, welcome those who are weak in faith, but not for the purpose of quarreling over opinions. Now you might be wondering, what opinions are we even talking about in this case? Are we talking about food? You ever had an argument with your family on the way to get food? Where do you want to go to eat? I don't care where we go. Okay, let's go to Chipotle. No, I don't want Chipotle. Okay, well, let's go to Harry's. No, I don't want to go to Harry's. Okay, you choose something. Okay, let's go to Subway. I don't want to go to Subway. And you just fight the whole way there. And then you go somewhere that nobody wants to go, and you share a meal looking at each other upset that you went to a place that neither one of you want to go. You ever been there before? Some of you are shaking your head. You know what I'm talking about. What are they fighting about? Food? They're fighting about food. Food. Because the Jewish Christians have grown up with a tradition that says you can't eat certain types of meat. It's based on laws that says this kind of meat is unclean and this kind of meat is clean, and you only can eat the clean kind because if you eat the unclean kind, then it makes you unclean. Like they actually had the concept that whatever you took into your mouth made you have the same effect as the thing that you took into your mouth. It wasn't something that just washed itself on the way down. It made the whole inside of you unclean. So you could not eat something that was unclean. The Gentile Christians did not grow up with the same tradition. They didn't have those rules growing up, and so they eat anything, whatever they want, and they have no bad feelings about it. So let me make it personal for you. Let me ask you a question. How do you order your steak? Right? So many differences in the room. There's only one way you should order your steak. And that is medium rare or less cooked than that. That's the only way you should eat any steak. Which becomes a volatile conversation with people because we have people in the room who choose to have it cooked more than that. And when you have, it's interesting. You go out to eat with family, and if you have different ways of ordering steak, and you're the one that orders it medium rare, and it comes, this is what they always say to you. You like your meat like mooing? That's what they said. You like your meat still mooing? And I say, well, do you like eating charcoal? In my family growing up in a small town in Ohio, we didn't know there was such thing as you could get it done medium rare, or at least nobody told me, because every time we went and ate steak, everybody always ordered it well done. And every time I would take a bite, I was wondering how long it would take me to chew it before I could swallow it. And so I fell in love with A1 sauce because it was the only way to help it slide down. So we could sit here and argue about what kind of steak do you order, and people would have different opinions, and we could probably even fight about it. Some of you would say, if you order it too rare, then you're going to get sick, and then we would convince you, no, we're not. I've never been sick. And then the others of you in the room who don't eat meat think we're all crazy and mean and shouldn't be doing what we're doing, and so there's another fight that could happen. But they're quarreling over food. As the majority group living in Rome, the majority of the Christians living in Rome, the Gentiles have leaned into judgment against the Jews over the issue of what food you should eat. Because the Gentiles have said, it's not a big deal what you eat. We're followers of Jesus and we eat it and we're still okay. You can eat it. But the Jewish people feel tempted by it and so they don't want to eat it. And that's why it says, welcome those who are weak. It's talking to the Gentiles. Welcome those who are weak, who feel like they can't do this thing. There are things like that in your life, in your homes, where some people say it's okay to do that and somebody else says it's not okay to do that. If you have an alcoholic in your family, chances are you're not going to go out to dinner with them and have a beer in front of them because you don't want them to be someone that feels like they didn't need this thing and that you're the one that's going to lead them back into it. Others of you, it's Doritos in your home. Like Doritos in your home turns into this fight with your family because some of you think it's okay to eat Doritos and some of you don't. And so sometimes some of you who think it's not okay to eat Doritos, you secretly eat Doritos. You don't tell anybody that you're eating Doritos. And so when you go to get the Dorito bag the next day, everybody's in the house going, who ate the Doritos? And then the one person said, I don't eat Doritos, so it wasn't me. And then we caught them on video eating Doritos. But you know what I'm saying? Some people feel confident as believers, I can do this and be okay. And then others feel like, I can't do this because it won't be okay. And the Gentiles are saying it's okay, and the Jewish are saying it's not okay. And the Gentiles believer have gotten to the point where they actually despise the Jewish believers. Now, I know you've never been there before. There's no way. You've never had a political conversation with someone that has led you to the point where you judge them and you're not sure you even want to see them again. Happens on Facebook almost every single day, doesn't it? Like, don't tell me what your political beliefs are on Facebook because it just makes everyone upset. I'm sure it's never happened to you parents in the room where you've been having a conversation with your kids that leads you to judge their friends. and then you force your kids to choose between the family and the friends. But Paul says, come on, church. He's writing to them. He says, come on, church. Just welcome them instead of cold shoulder them. That's all you have to do is just welcome them instead of cold shoulder them. Because when you do that, what happens is you become someone who is pursuing what builds them up rather than what tears them down, which makes it possible for them to see God's love visibly in this world. And that's what we all want. And you know what? Jesus is the example. Jesus is the example because when Jesus welcomes, he accepts you as a friend the way you are. When Jesus welcomes you, Jesus is someone who receives you with a deep personal interest. When Jesus welcomes you, he opens up his heart and lets you step into where he is. Jesus doesn't judge or despise. He's not preachy or argumentative. He's the kind of person who Paul urges his readers to be in chapter 15, verse 1. Jesus puts up with the failings of the weak. None of us want to put up with the failings of the weak. We want to kick the weak out. But Jesus puts up with the failings of the weak. He actually lends them a hand to those who falter, even when it's inconvenient. Which is why it says to us in chapter 15, verse 7, welcome one another just as Christ has welcomed you. And to welcome like Jesus, it challenges you to be others-directed rather than self-centered, which means that you have to find ways to build others up. And so I'm going to tell you something. As I was saying this last night, I felt like people are looking at me like, Coy, you're like getting too crazy right now. But I want to tell you something that's discouraging in the church world, and that is that one of the top reasons young people are not interested in God or the church anymore is because they have the perception that Christians are too confident that they know it all. Like young people believe that the church are the kind of people who believe they know it all, especially in relation to science. We send our kids to college, and we're so excited for them to go to college, and they come home and they tell us what they're learning, and we go into a panic attack as a parent. Like, what are they teaching you? Like, what are they teaching you? Like, they're teaching you what? They're teaching you that the earth is how many years old? Like, how many years old is the earth? They teach our kids things. And sometimes our kids come home from college, and they're excited, like, I want to save the oceans. And then we look at them for something they want to do that's really good, and they're like, what is your teacher, what's your professor teaching you? Like, you don't need to save the oceans. Forget about the straws and the turtles' noses. But you know what I'm saying? Like, our kids go to college and they come home, or our kids go to school and they come home, and we're afraid of what they're teaching them. And when I went to seminary, it happened to me. I went to seminary to learn about being a pastor, like to learn theology and the scriptures. And I would come home and I would tell my family the things that I was learning, and they would look at me and say, are you sure they're teaching you the right things? I'm learning to be a pastor, and I'm coming home, and they're telling me, I'm not sure you're learning the right things. But some of the things I learned in seminary is that the Bible, this may surprise some of you. I hope you don't hate me after I say this. But some of the things that I learned is that the Bible is not a science book. I'm not sure. Like, it's shocking to some people. Like, the Bible is not a science book. And so we don't go to the Bible looking how to be a doctor. I hope Dr. Saylor doesn't go to the Bible to try to figure out how to do surgery on people. Because it won't go real well. But the Bible is not a science book. And so sometimes we see things in the Bible and we believe that it's God trying to teach us science, and it's not God trying to teach us science. It's people who are writing in a culture the best that they know. It'd be like us right now saying something about what we believe about science right now, and then a few thousand years later, when things have been figured out a little bit more, and they look back at us and they say, well, they were right even though we were wrong. We were just saying what we knew. That's it. Because in the Bible, it talks about the sun rotating around the earth, which I don't believe is true. But if you're someone who believes the Bible is a science book, you would have to believe that. Now, there are some things that we find in the Bible that talk about some of the history and some of the science that makes sense. But my point is that we're losing young people because they believe that older Christians are convinced that they know it all about everything. And I think as long as we give the young people that perception, then we will continue to be a church that dies into the future generations. So if you're here and you're over 40 years old, I want to say something to you, which includes me. You are not going to think like a young person in our church or in our world. Amen, young people? Uh-huh. See, they're too afraid to shout because you're going to tell them they're wrong. They will see things different. But guess what? So did you. And young people in our church and in our world, they don't need us to be overprotective and overly critical. They just need us to welcome them. That's it. They just need us to welcome them. God is calling us to welcome others. God is calling us to welcome others. Like, that's the call that God is giving to us, is to welcome others. Because if we don't, the differences between us will become our boundaries. But when we do welcome others, what happens is that it builds others up, and it gives them strength, and it opens their eyes to see the unconditional love of God. So I love what it says in the Gospel of Luke. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, verse 2, it's the religious people, and this is what they're saying about Jesus. They say, this fella welcomes sinners. He welcomes them, and he eats with them. In the Bible that I read, I have never noticed a story where Jesus was accused of knowing it all. And in the story of the Bible that I read, I have never read a story where Jesus was accused of talking down to the younger generations. And as someone who's read this Bible a lot, I've never found a story in the Bible where Jesus was trying to defend the Bible against science. And in the story that I read in the Bible, I've never found a story where Jesus is blowing someone off or writing someone out of his story or choosing to cold shoulder them or push him out of their presence. Every time I read the stories when Jesus is walking past people that everyone else would ignore and they called for his attention, Jesus would stop and he would welcome them. He would welcome them into his life. And one of my favorite stories that I wrote a paper on in seminary is in the book of Luke, I think chapter 14. And Jesus was invited to go to somebody's house to share a meal with them, somebody who was a sinner. And Jesus is on the way to the house of someone who's a sinner, and along the way, a man comes up to him, and the man has this disease called dropsy, which makes it sound like he just drops to the floor. That's what like in my mind, I'm thinking, what in the world is dropsy? And dropsy is essentially a condition where your body cannot release the fluids. And so your body just continues to hold the fluids. And so you just become a bloated person. And so he comes up to Jesus looking to be healed. And then the religious people are standing there watching all this happen. Like they're already upset that Jesus is walking to the house of a sinner to share a meal with them. And now this other sinner comes up to Jesus and just wants some relief. Now, most of us, I think, would say to this person before we were willing to heal them, so confess to me what you've been doing wrong. What did you smoke last night? What kind of pills have you been taking? I can smell the alcohol in your breath. We want to interrogate them. We want to know what's your story so that I can decide whether or not I can welcome you. And Jesus has this person walk up to him, and he gets ready to heal the man. And all the religious people who are standing around, instead of cheering like, yes, this person's going to be healed, they stop Jesus and say, what are you doing? It's Sunday. Hobby Lobby. It's Sunday. You can't be doing this on Sunday. You can't heal someone on Sunday. It's Sunday. And what does Jesus do? He heals him anyway. Because he welcomes instead of cold shoulders. I'm going to wrap up my message with a story, which may cost some of you to never come back. But I grew up in a home with a family member whose story took a different path than mine. I grew up playing sports my entire life. Like, that's what I did. I would wake up in the morning, leave the house, get sweaty all day, and come back and eat dinner and go to bed, and then wake up and do it all over again. I just played sports all day long. I was like Hank, but with sports rather than tanks. Just sports all day long, would not stop running. And so when I got older, that was my life. I played basketball. That's what I did all the time. And when I got to about middle school, I became pretty good at one particular sport, which was basketball. I got pretty good at it. In a small town, you become somebody that other people talk about when you're good at sports. I guess we don't have anything else. And so I was that kid in middle school where people had all these expectations that, wow, Coy is going to be in the NBA someday, not knowing I wouldn't grow higher than I am right now. But the one family member had to grow up in that shadow. And when he was a young person, he did not pick up a basketball. He picked up pom-poms. And he did not pick up a football. He picked up a baton. And he did not put on running shorts. He put on my sister's dress. And he liked to sing, and he liked to dance. From 2 years old, he would go to my basketball games when I was 10 years old, and instead of cheering for me, like, I'm so excited that's my brother, he would stand over with the cheerleaders and do the cheers with them, better than they were doing, honestly. And then he would go to the football games where I didn't play football, but he would go to the football games, and we'd be like, where is he? Can't find him. And we knew where to look. He'd be down with the band, directing the band. This is a young age. Just enjoying it and loving it all. And then he got a little bit older, and a family friend no longer became a family friend. because he hurt our family member. And so just a few years later, at 18 years old, I believe he was one of the first people in our town that I've ever known of to come out and say, this is who I am. And the one thing I know about him that he's told me again and again is, I am never stepping foot in the church again because they don't want me for who I am. They're not going to welcome me like me. They want me to change before I step in. And Jesus says, you don't have to change them. You just have to welcome them. And some of you have family members who you wish the church would welcome. And there are people out in the world who wish the church would welcome them. And so what does it say? Welcome those who are weak in faith. Welcome others as Jesus has welcomed you. Can we do that, church? So stand with me. My daughter said last night, Brooke, can you hand me my phone? She said, Dad, I laughed so much last night at your message. And then I almost cried. And then someone else came up to me today and said this. They heard my message last night, and they said, I read this today. This is a little note that they saw on Facebook that says, I'd rather attend church with messed up people who love God than religious people who dislike messed up people. So let's be that kind of church. And so what I want to do right now is I want to pray with and for some of you. So bow your heads, because I think there may be some of you in the room who you came here today not expecting to hear what you heard. And maybe you have a spark in your heart that maybe there's a place for you in the church. Maybe there's a place for you in the church. And I think what I want to do with you right now is I want to start with us welcoming you. I want to start with God welcoming you. So I want to give you a chance to ask God to welcome you in. Actually, it tells us that Jesus stands at your door and knocks. So if you're here this morning and you want to be welcomed into God's family, adopted one, will you pray with me? God, I come here this morning wondering who in this world loves me enough to welcome me the way that I am. And if what this pastor is saying is true today, it starts with being welcomed by your Son. So Jesus, will you help me feel welcomed by you this morning? Forgive me of my past sins. You've already wiped those away, and just renew me from the inside out. Create in me a pure heart, and sit at the table with me and laugh and chat and talk and cry and cheer and encourage and just be here together with me, Jesus. And then for everybody else in the church who is a follower of Jesus, I think God is trying to open our eyes to see that we don't have to be like the Gentiles who despise everyone else. But God, let us be a church that welcomes. Yeah. Let us be a church that welcomes instead of cold shoulder. So God, when we walk out of this room, we're going to have to change some of the ways that we interact with the world. We don't have to be the ones who go into the world and make sure that we let them know that we know it all. We just have to go out into the world and let them know we know the one who knows it all. Yeah. That's it. And so God, if we just go out to the world and welcome them into our homes, I wonder what the world would think of the church if we just said, you know what, come share a meal with me. If you want to bring your beer, that's okay. If you want to bring overcooked steak, that's okay. If you want to bring your broken family, that's okay. If you want to bring your messy self, that's okay. God, give us that vision. In your name we pray. Amen.